I'm Renee Williams.
And I'm Billy Thomas.
And welcome to another edition of From the Woods Today. You know, Billy, I'm really excited about today's show because it was actually a viewer who requested this show, and it's been a little bit for us finding someone, but we found someone, and now we've got to have it on today's show, so I love it.
Oh, I am so excited as well, Renee. A big thanks to that viewer who submitted that suggestion to get us talking about vernal ponds. A big thanks for that, because we have really tracked down and got the preeminent expert on Tom Beebe Hauser. I've had a chance to work with Tom in the past, and he's been doing this for a while. So I'm really excited to have him on talking about these, and I think people will really enjoy this presentation. So I'm really looking forward to that. And then I think it'll be his first time on the show, so that's exciting. Always great to get a new guest on the show. And then we also have Dr. Ellen Crocker, and she's got another edition of What's Bugging My Tree. And I told her I would let her do the big reveal when we get to her segment. So again, appreciate Dr. Crocker and Tom Beebe Hauser being with us. It's going to be a really good show. If you all have questions for our guests, you can use the chat pod if you're in Zoom with us. And if you're on YouTube Live, you can hit us up via email at forestry.extension@uky.edu, and we'll try to get back to you there. But again, thank you all so much for being with us today. Renee, a pleasure to be with you as well.
As always, I love being with you on the show as well. So, but let's go ahead and get started because I'm really excited about this topic. So, Tom, if you want to turn your camera on. Hi, welcome to the show.
Great to be here. Thank you.
Greetings.
Really appreciate it. So tell us a little bit about what you're going to talk about today.
We're going to be talking about vernal pools, which are shallow water wetlands that go dry sometime during the summer and fall. And they provide habitat to some really unique and special wildlife and plant species.
Okay.
That's awesome. All
right.
Well, looking forward to it. Thank you.
Okay, I'll give it a try. All right, well, folks, you are looking at a vernal pool here, and this is one that we constructed at McBrayer Elementary School in Rowan County, Kentucky, a number of years ago. And it's a fascinating ecosystem because it fills with water in the spring, and by the end of the summer, it goes dry. And here's another vernal pool. Vernal pools are also known as seasonal wetlands. We also call them ephemeral wetlands, and this one is supplied with groundwater. It's also constructed, and it will fill in the spring, but then in the fall, when the elevation of groundwater goes down, it will go dry. And here's another vernal pool. They can be in sunlit locations, in open fields, or they can be in wooded areas. This one happens to be in an open field, and this vernal pool is maintained by a dense layer of clay in the basin. So it has really no interaction with groundwater, but again, it does go dry during the summer months. Vernal pools are exciting places to visit. When you visit a vernal pool, you can't help it but bring out your camera, your phone, and start snapping pictures of the plants and animals that you're looking at. And here's a vernal pool. This one is in Illinois, and it's in an old field. And you can hear the chorus frogs that are calling. And these small habitats are of great value to amphibians, and they're used for breeding in the spring because they do not contain fish. If you have children, who would not want to explore a vernal pool by getting into a small boat and seeing what's around? If you want to see wildlife species, visit a vernal pool. You'll find wood ducks using vernal pools, especially in the winter when those acorns from the surrounding oak trees fall into the vernal pool and fill it. And I've seen up to 70 wood ducks using a vernal pool in a wooded area. One will see quite a few mallards in a vernal pool. Mallards frequent vernal pools because there's plenty for them to eat. And here are some ducklings. We find that many waterfowl species will use vernal pools for breeding and for raising their young because they're so full of life, and there's so many invertebrates and small plants and seeds for the animals to eat. If you're a deer hunter, you might like to visit or have a vernal pool on your property. First of all, the females, the does, will use vernal pools during the summer because they're lactating or nursing, and they have to have this water for nursing. And then also the deer will use the vernal pools throughout the year because of the plants that are growing in and around the vernal pools. What we find is that there are sedges and rushes that contain high parts per million of sodium. If you look at a plant growing on dry ground, it may have 10 to 20 parts per million of sodium. However, a plant growing in a wetland could have over 10,000 parts per million of sodium. So these vernal pools are natural sources of salt for deer. Here's a rusty blackbird. They are specialists that use vernal pools for much of their life cycle. And this rusty blackbird, it's declining in populations across North America. So vernal pools are important for their survival. You're looking at an Indiana bat, a federally endangered species. We captured this over a vernal pool that we had constructed on the Danube National Forest in eastern Kentucky. It was interesting when we were netting these bats, they would encounter the net at low elevations right above the water. And when we would remove them from the net, they would have a wet chin showing us that they had been drinking out of the waters in the vernal pool. Here we're looking at two rare bat species. The one on the left is the Raffinexed big-eared bat. It has this silver hair. And the one on the right is the Virginia big-eared bat. It is more buff colored or yellowish colored. And these are both rare species that use cliffline habitats in eastern Kentucky. And we captured these drinking from the water in a vernal pool that we had built. One of my favorite animals is the eastern box turtle. They make great use of these ephemeral wetlands or vernal pools. They use them during the summer to find something to eat and also to burrow into that mud so they can stay cool in the summer and also so they can evade detection from predators. American avocet is a shorebird, and like many other shorebirds, they use vernal pools because the waters are fluctuating. Now, many people really want to build a farm pond or a perennial water wetland, but if you build a vernal pool, its water levels are going to be fluctuating, and with that fluctuation, it exposes the mud flats, and in those mud flats are all these invertebrates that the shorebirds will eat and depend on for their survival. So yes, fluctuating water levels are important. Where do you find them? In a vernal pool. This is a hibiscus or a rose mallow, and this is a plant that you can find around the edges of vernal pools. Years ago, people would use the juices from this plant to give the puff in the marshmallows. Now we use corn syrup. Here's a cardinal flower. This is a beautiful plant that you'll find in wooded areas along the edges of vernal pools where the soil is most. This plant received its name because of the beautiful red color, which was the same as the red robes that were worn by cardinals in the Catholic Church. The monarch butterfly makes great use of the plants that grow in and around wetland areas, especially vernal pools. Here we have the swamp milkweed with the monarch using it, and we plant small milkweed around the vernal pools that we build, and we find it naturally growing around the natural vernal pools. Here's a button bush. This is a shrub that will grow in and near vernal pools, and this shrub will flower quite a while, and it's used by many pollinators, including the monarch butterfly. And here we have monarchs using the perimeters of vernal pools or the mud. The mud in vernal pools is of great importance to pollinators, including the monarch. Here's where they receive their water and where they can get their minerals that are important to their survival. And when we start building a vernal pool, we see so many pollinators coming into that moist soil that's exposed. The rusty patched bumblebee is a federally threatened species, and this can be found near vernal pools and using the plants that are flowering near the vernal pools. So here we see some duck butts, and we're wondering why are ducks using this wetland area? Well, they're using it because there's plenty to eat. The shallow water in a vernal pool is of great importance to the invertebrates and the plants with annual seeds, and the ducks find these areas and feed in these vernal pools. Vernal pools are unique in that they do not support fish. Fish like the bluegill can't survive in a vernal pool because at some time during the year, that vernal pool is going to dry. Now, fish will control amphibian and invertebrate populations in wetlands. So if you have a farm pond that has fish, that's great. It's great for fishing, but it's not good for amphibians and invertebrates because any animal like a frog or a toad or a salamander that gets into that pool will probably be eaten by the fish that live in it. So also we find that vernal pools do not support the American bullfrog. The American bullfrog is non-native west of the Mississippi River. It is a native species east of the Mississippi, but the American bullfrog, it will eat, again, about anything it fits in its mouth, and it will eat other frogs, other toads, other salamanders. It'll eat small muskrats and even small turtles. So that's why if you have a vernal pool, you won't see many American bullfrogs because their larvae take at least 2 years to develop in the water. So that vernal pool goes dry every year. This big predator will be out of the game, and we'll see many of these other frogs and toads that are less common in the water. Here's a fairy shrimp. Some people call these sea monkeys. This is a crustacean, and you will only find it in vernal pools that do not contain fish. Because if it is in a vernal pool with fish, the fish will eat them all. And this is an important food source for waterfowl. And these young men are searching for crustaceans, specifically the fairy shrimp, and they have found them in this vernal pool. And this is in Oldham County, Kentucky. And what we see here is the shallow water that's found in these ruts holds water long enough to support the fairy shrimp. And this is of great importance to waterfowl. Here's a clam shrimp, another crustacean, and we find these in vernal pools. You know, I came across a story from Australia where there was this natural vernal pool that had been dry for 400 years. A monsoon came in with all the fresh water from the heavy rains, and they had the largest hatch of clam shrimp and fairy shrimp, and their cysts had remained dormant in the soil of those vernal pools for over 400 years, only to hatch with the waters from the hurricane. You'll find dragonfly larvae in vernal pools. These control mosquito larvae. And we also find that we have salamander larvae in vernal pools that will also control mosquito larvae. So what we find in vernal pools is that mosquitoes are not a problem because there are so many predators in the water that will control those mosquito larvae. Why are there so many ducks in this photo? Well, they found a lot to eat in this vernal pool. This vernal pool has filled in the fall with the rains, and it's exposed a lot of food and inundated a lot of food the ducks can use. Here's a 1-year-old vernal pool that we built on Audrey and Eric Matthews Farm in Meadow Creek, British Columbia. And we took this drone photo of the vernal pool, and I'd like you to see if you can count how many ducks are on this vernal pool. Look on the water and look on the logs that are in the water. And I'd like to give you a prize if you get the right number, but I'll keep things moving along here. There are 86 mallards using this vernal pool that's only 1 year old. They're there because they're finding a lot to eat. Well, vernal pools have great value to amphibians. We're looking at a natural vernal pool on a ridgetop here in Kentucky. We find that spring peepers will breed and use vernal pools. The spring peeper has this X on the back, and we commonly hear these breeding in little puddles or vernal pools in the spring. The chorus frog will use vernal pools for breeding. Again, they use these miniature vernal pools. It's best identified by those faint stripes on its back. And here we have the larva of the American toad, otherwise known as tadpoles. And they will use the shallowest of vernal pools to lay their eggs early in the spring, and their larvae develop quickly before that vernal pool will dry. Again, they use vernal pools because they're not fish or bullfrogs that would eat them. And here's a marbled salamander. This is like the poster child of vernal pools. We see marbled salamanders in vernal pools, and you'll find them beneath the log in a vernal pool in late fall. They're waiting for the rains to come. And when the rains come, they will lay their eggs in the vernal pool, and their eggs and their larvae end up being the largest that we find in the vernal pools because they're there when the rains first arrive. And here's a wood frog. This is a frog that can survive freezing temperatures, and it's best identified by the black mask. And the wood frog will use vernal pools, and you'll find their eggs early in February, even when there's still ice and snow surrounding the vernal pools. And it's essential that they have vernal pools that dry every year in order for their eggs to hatch and for their larvae to survive and to emerge from the vernal pool. Looking at the eggs of the wood frog, they look like a bunch of eyeballs. And if you're out in the woods in February and you happen across a vernal pool, you may see these many clumps in the water. Well, this is a red-spotted newt. The red-spotted newts will use vernal pools that do not dry every year. And if they are in a vernal pool that doesn't dry every year, then they can actually control the wood frog eggs and the wood frog larvae. So that's why if you really want to help amphibians like the wood frog and the chorus frog and the spring peeper, you want to build your vernal pool so it will dry every year. And that way you won't get a high population of red-spotted newts. Vernal pools don't have to be attractive to have value. This vernal pool would not win any wetland design star competition. Well, this is actually a constructed vernal pool, but it was built by elk. It's an elk wallow. And they were wallowing in this area that had a high water table, and they dug out this vernal pool that was used by so many amphibians. Vernal pools can be any size to have value to wildlife. This vernal pool is no larger than the desk that may be in front of you now. And it is full of clam shrimp, fairy shrimp, and marbled salamanders. It's a small ecosystem, but an important one. And I know many people that have built vernal pools this size in their backyard, and they're surprised at the diversity of dragonflies, damselflies, and frogs that will colonize the waters. Vernal pools were once common features on the landscape. Here we are looking at a series of vernal pools in Illinois on the Shawnee National Forest. These are natural vernal pools, and they occur in the pits that were created when large old growth trees fell over. See, this area was logged, but it was never tilled for farming. It was logged and then it became a pasture field. So the trees came up on the higher ground in between the pits that were vernal pools. And this gives us a glimpse of what many areas look like in Kentucky and surrounding states before they were changed for agriculture. We had this pit and mound topography with the pits from the root masses coming out of the ground, forming vernal pools in the spring. Unfortunately, most vernal pools have been filled and leveled for farming across Kentucky and surrounding states. Here we have a farmer who was filling a vernal pool by dragging soil into it from the surrounding land using the scraper blade on a tractor. People have been draining and filling vernal pools and wetlands since Europeans colonized North America. What we see here is that we're using an elevated grader to dig ditches through wetland areas and to create channels to straighten streams. And this technique was used to drain many vernal pools across Kentucky. Does this look like a good place? Does this look like a good place to build a vernal pool? It does to me. See where the ditches come together at right angles? Well, this is along Slab Camp Creek in Rowan County, Kentucky. And the presence of these ditches at right angles shows us that somebody's drained a wetland. And it's also a great place to bring back a wetland. Well, people have been draining wetlands for agriculture and urban development by digging ditches in the wetlands and then placing wood and stone drains in the bottom of the ditches and then covering over these drains with soil so you could farm over the top of them. And here we have a class being taught in the early 1900s, and they're showing how to install clay drain tiles to drain wetland areas for agriculture. And I really like how the professor is dressed here. Here he is digging ditches to put in clay tiles, and this individual has a nice suit on. These clay tiles were used to drain a vernal pool in the state of Virginia, and they were exposed under flood conditions when water flowed over the tops of the drain tiles and washed away the soil. but the drain tiles are still functioning to drain the wetland area. What you're looking at here appears to be natural linear vernal pools, but we'd be wrong in saying that. What we're really looking at here is what used to be a much larger wetland area, and it was drained and farmed using the lands technique. And what the farmer did was to plow the land directionally and plow the soil to create these ridges we call lands or beds. And the water you see standing is in dead furrows, and that's where the soil was removed to make the ridges. You see this pattern all over Kentucky. And when you see this pattern of farming, you know that wetlands were reshaped so they could be farmed. This is not a good way to prepare land for farming, but it's an inexpensive way to change wetlands into farmland. Here's another good place to restore a vernal pool in a wooded area. You're looking at the red line here, the dashed line. That's a ditch, and that ditch was used to drain wetland areas. And the trees have come in because the open standing water is now gone, and because the ditch has lowered the elevation of groundwater. Again, this is a great place to restore a vernal pond. So the good news is that vernal ponds can be restored and they can be created, and that these wetlands can be built so they look and function similar to natural wetlands. And you're looking here at a constructed vernal pool on the Danube National Forest in Rowan County. And here's another vernal pool that we restored, and this one is in Menifee County, Kentucky. And it has the wet and the dry cycle, which is typical of these seasonal wetlands and so important to the amphibians. Well, let's move to Indiana, and we're at the Muscatatuck National Wildlife Refuge. And what we're looking at here is a series of wetlands and vernal pools that were drained in the 1800s. They were drained by reshaping the land, by filling in the pools, and by installing buried drainage structures made out of clay tiles. Well, we disabled these and we built a series of vernal pool wetlands for a workshop. And the same year in the winter, look at all these sandhill cranes that came in to use it during migration. If you provide wildlife with suitable habitat, they will certainly use that habitat, and that's the case at Muscatatuck. Here we have a unique creature that few people have seen. It's called the eastern spadefoot. It's similar to a toad. It has the spades on its hind feet, and it allows it to burrow deep into the soil to escape predation. This is a rare species on Cape Cod, Massachusetts, and also in Rhode Island. And I've been working with Mass Audubon, specifically Ian Ives with Mass Audubon. And for the last 10 years, we have been building and restoring vernal pools to provide breeding habitat for the eastern spadefoot. And here we see a site prior to restoration of a vernal pool. This is a small canopy gap in the forest. How small? As small as 40 foot in diameter. And what we did is we brought in an excavator and we first removed and saved the topsoil. And here we are using a larger excavator to build another vernal pool. And I think it's really important to be out on the site during construction. Don't prepare a set of plans and give it to somebody else. If you're interested in building a vernal pool, build it in partnership with a heavy equipment operator. And here we've excavated the depression, and we're going to have to use an aquatic safe liner to build this vernal pool because the soil is too high in sand and there's no groundwater. So here we are using a aquatic safe fish grade liner, and we're placing it over a layer of fabric called geotextile. And we order these from companies one piece and factory seamed, and we order them the size of the wetland that we're building. So here we are making a sandwich out of one layer of geotextile to protect the underside of the aquatic safe liner. And then we're going to place another layer of geotextile over the top. Then we anchor the top edge of that liner in geotextile with 12-inch long landscape spikes, so it doesn't move when we're covering it with soil. We've trimmed the corners off of the liner, and we've made sure that that top edge of the liner in geotextile are all the same elevation. We use this by using a laser, And this is demanding construction procedure. You have to be on the ground doing this to make sure that everything goes right and that your vernal pool holds water as long as you want it to. So here the excavator is covering that liner in geotextile with soil, making sure that the excavator does not travel over any part of the liner. If the excavator travels over any part of the liner, we'll have differential compaction and shearing, and the wetland will not hold water. But now we've sown to native plant species, and now we're mulching using straw. The straw will help reduce the non-native plants that would come in with all that bare soil that's exposed. And with all the plants that we establish in and around the vernal pool, we're hoping to provide habitat for the rusty-patched bumblebee and many other species. Now, Mass Audubon is doing a lot of monitoring. They've been monitoring their vernal pools for at least 10 years and looking at what species of amphibians and invertebrates colonize the vernal pools. Here we have spadefoot eggs that have come in. And what we find is that spadefoots are now using these vernal pools that we've constructed for breeding, and that their eggs are hatching. You're looking at larval eastern spadefoots here. And then when they develop into adults, they will come back and use the vernal pools that we constructed for breeding. So this is quite a success story, being able to head start these eastern spadefoots and to release them in our constructed vernal pools, and then have them come back years later and breed naturally in these vernal pools. Another vernal pool project I've been working on is near Creston, British Columbia, Canada. And you're looking at a natural vernal pool here along the Kootenay River. And you can see that during the winter and spring, it's full of water, but in the summer and fall, it goes dry. We're working to help the northern leopard frog, which in 2016 could only be found in one vernal pond wetland in British Columbia, Canada. We've been working to increase its habitat to help bring back populations of the species. Most of the natural vernal pools in British Columbia have been drained by digging ditches. And you're looking at a deep ditch here that was dug to drain wetlands, including vernal pools. And a good way to find a drained vernal pool is to look for reed canary grass. Reed canary grass is a non-native invasive species found in most every state and every province. And when you find a dense growth of it, that almost always shows that you are in a wetland that has been drained. So I worked with a team of people. This is Marc-Andre Boucher. He's the director of the Creston Valley Wildlife Management Area. And we formed a team of dedicated folks to identify places where we could build vernal pools that were close to the vernal pool where the northern leopard frog was breeding in BC. So we designed our first project of 6 vernal pools that were located between the breeding pool of the northern leopard frogs and the Old Goat Channel, a river channel where the leopard frogs were wintering. They were getting deep down into the mud of that Old Goat Channel, and that's where they're spending the winter. We worked on the project in November when the northern leopard frogs were already hibernating in the bottom of the river channel. And we selected areas that had reed canary grass with a seasonally high water table. And we brought in an excavator to do the work. Now, the ground was so wet in November that the excavator would have been stuck in the mud had we not brought in logs. And we brought in a number of logs that we could use as rafts to keep the excavator from sinking. And these logs were about 20 feet long and about 20 inches in diameter. And the excavator would move them as the excavator moved so that it wouldn't get stuck in building the vernal pool. And here you see how the excavator is staying afloat on the logs and is building a vernal pool wetland in the winter. And as we build it, the groundwater enters the vernal pool. Here's Ted Crane. I believe that he is the best wetland builder in Canada. He's been working with me for a number of years now. He really likes to help wildlife species. And here he is standing on the logs that his machine is staying afloat on. If he were to get off of these logs, he would sink in mud up to his waist. We used colored plastic ribbons to mark where the wetland edge would be. And here you see that the excavator is digging the pool. And as the excavator digs the pool, we have the dozer pushing the soil away from the excavator. The dozer is not able to dig because it would be stuck in the mud. The tracks on the dozer are wide. We call it low ground pressure. This is so it won't get stuck in the mud. Oftentimes we have to wait for the mud that's removed from building the wetland to freeze, and then we could reshape it after it freezes. And here we're reshaping the soil so that it can be farmed near the wetland areas. Now here's a vernal pool that we dug the day before, and you can see that it's beginning to fill with groundwater. And we have lots of pits and mounds in here. We find that these pits and mounds are of critical importance for providing good habitat for plants and invertebrates, and also preventing any one plant like the cattail from taking over. So here's one of the vernal pools we built 1 year later. And this is a vernal pool in the spring when groundwater has filled it. But here's the same vernal pool in the fall when it's going dry. You can see the pit and mound topography. There's quite a diversity of plants growing in this wetland. We built these vernal pools to be all different shapes and all different water depths. You never know if you're going to be in a drought year or in a wet year. And we wanted to make sure that we at least had some of the vernal pools dry every fall. Now here's the shallowest of the vernal pools we built. It's only 1 foot deep. Now this vernal pool dries every year, even in years when you get torrential rains. So this is the vernal pool that's of critical importance to reproducing northern leopard frogs in a year with a lot of rainfall. We're finding in these vernal pools that we get quite a diversity of plants. In the moist soil, we get this Biden's or beggar's tick growing. This is a fantastic plant for pollinators. The vernal pools have their unique beauty. The algae you see in this vernal pool is of great importance to the larvae of the frogs that eat that algae. And the northern leopard frog is now breeding in these new wetlands that we've been building in British Columbia, which is really good news. And when you're out in these vernal pools, you may see the tracks of grizzly bear. The grizzly bear is making great use of these vernal pools. And here is a soft stem bulrush, and this one was eaten by a grizzly bear. Well, let's move over to Pennsylvania now and look at a few vernal pools that we've been building at Kings Gap. It's a park in Pennsylvania, and they have an area of the park dedicated to forest pools. It's a preserve for vernal pools at Kings Gap. And there are nice signs showing you how to get to the vernal pools. Well, unfortunately, a few years ago, all their vernal pools were dry. They would hold water for maybe a short time period early in the spring, and they would go dry so quickly that they would strand all of the invertebrates and the larvae of the amphibians that were trying to breed in them. And no one really knew why these vernal pools were going dry. We thought it was due solely to climate change. So the people at Kings Gap invited me to come out and to investigate these natural vernal pools that were no longer holding water. So we did quite a bit of test drilling. We looked at the watershed, we looked at land development, and what we concluded is that the elevation of groundwater had gone down, more than likely because of development in the valley below. And these vernal pools were no longer of value to the amphibians, and they had gone for like 5 to 10 years without filling with water and staying full long enough for amphibians to develop. So we worked with the Nature Conservancy and with the people with Pennsylvania Parks, and we designed the restoration and the repair of these natural vernal pools. One of the first steps in the repair involved removing leaves from the basin prior to bringing in heavy equipment. And we also removed clumps of moss for later replanting. Then we worked with the Upper Susquehanna Coalition, and they brought in their heavy equipment and their personnel to aid us in repairing these vernal pools. And we would first remove the topsoil and save it nearby. Then we'd use the vernal pool to reshape the basin. And in this vernal pool, we're digging it deeper so that we can be closer to the groundwater. And the soil that's removed in this project, we removed it using a tracked machine. And this tracked dump truck was really worked well. It allowed us to get in between the trees and it didn't leave deep ruts behind. And here's one of the vernal pools that we worked on soon after construction. This is one that we built using a compacted clay liner. We found that clay was present, and under the right moisture content, we were able to compact this clay in layers and then return the topsoil. And then that way, the vernal pool would hold water longer in spring and summer. And here's a vernal pool that we restored by digging it deeper to get into the groundwater and by loosening the soils that were in the basin so that the water would come to the surface. Again, we returned the topsoil, and here the vernal pool is just starting to fill with water. But some of the vernal pools, we could not find groundwater and we could not find clay that could be compacted. So we used aquatic safe liners that were buried in the ground. So what do these wetlands look like after 1 year? Here's one of the vernal pools that we restored using the compacted clay liner technique. Here's another one that we restored using the groundwater technique, where we loosened the soils and excavated deeper into the existing groundwater. And here's a wetland that we built using an aquatic safe liner that was buried in the ground and protected with geotextile. So yes, these techniques work, and they're giving us vernal pools that have a much longer hydro period. Now, Kathy King and Mike Bertram are volunteers who've been working with us on the project since it began, and they have been monitoring amphibian and invertebrate colonization of these vernal pools, and they've taught us a lot about the shape and the type of vernal pools that we can build so they will provide habitat for the species like the wood frog and the marbled salamander and the fairy shrimp. So we've been building vernal pools in the most different locations. Have a program going on to build vernal pools at elementary schools, middle schools, and high schools. And you're looking at one of the vernal pools we built near Moorhead, Kentucky. And here's one we built at the Round County High School in Moorhead, Kentucky. And here's one we built in the urban area of Prestonsburg at the elementary school. So yes, we can build vernal pools in urban areas. And here's one we built at Rodburn Elementary School. And this is a great environment for students to use and to explore. We're modifying stormwater retention ponds by adding vernal pond features. And here's a vernal pool that we built in an existing stormwater detention pond by using an aquatic safe liner. And when you bring students out to a vernal pool, you have their full attention. They're just thrilled with what they see in and around the vernal pool. And we give them nets and we get them into rubber boots and they can explore these ecosystems. And it's amazing what they can remember. Here we are visiting a vernal pool that we constructed on the Daniel National Forest. And the young man on the left, he approached me 10 years later when I was shopping at Walmart. And he said, "Mr. Biebighauser, do you remember me?" And I said, "No, sir, I don't remember you." And he said, "I remember when you took us out to a vernal pool on the Danube National Forest and we sampled it." And he proceeded to tell me what they caught and everything he remembered from that day. So I figure if you can remember a field trip 10 years later, it had quite an impact on your life. So we've been building vernal pools with the students and with the staff and with the teachers, where they learn about the control of non-native plants and they learn about how to establish native plants for pollinators in and around these ecosystems. And they have a great time. Here they are adding fine organics to a restored vernal pool. So you may wonder, can you build a wetland or a vernal pool? Of course you can. This is Alan Unversall, Mount Orem, Ohio. He's an accountant and he's built over 25 wetlands on 2 farms that he's owned. How about Chris and Melissa Urich? This family has built over 300 vernal pools in New York with the Upper Susquehanna Coalition and on their own farm. Now, George, he was a developer in Arizona. He's built a lot of subdivisions. Now he's building vernal pool wetlands on his land and his neighbor's land to provide breeding habitat for the threatened Chiricahua leopard frog. Amazing accomplishments. Frank and Kathy, They're in Amato, Arizona. She's an ornithologist. He's a retired fisheries biologist. And here's a vernal pool that they built on their land. And Norm Allard, he takes the prize. He's a community planner with the Yakanuki Lower Kootenai Band near Creston, British Columbia. He's been building over 50 vernal pools a year and sees the great value to waterfowl and to rare species of amphibians and even to the western painted turtle. If you're interested in learning how to build a vernal pool, the best way is to build one and build one with myself. I teach hands-on wetland restoration workshops across North America. Please go to my website and find out when the next one is offered. Show up and we'll show you how to build a vernal pool by building one or more. You'll learn how to use engineering equipment like a laser to make sure that it's the right depth and the right shape and the right size. You'll learn about soil texturing. I mean, look at this soil sample. This has enough clay where you can build a vernal pool without a synthetic liner, which is really good news. And you may be able to participate in a Design Star competition for building toad houses, like this individual has done. If you don't want to get your hands dirty, you can just come and watch us build vernal pools and support the projects in other ways. So yes, it is possible to build vernal pools, and these will function and will look much like vernal pools that have been drained on the landscape. The vernal pools you build will provide important habitat to pollinators. These moist soils are of critical importance to many of the plants that our pollinators require. And you're going to see a diversity of beautiful wildflowers growing in and around your wetland areas. And I believe we now have the technology to build vernal pools that will last forever. These can be built at a low cost, and they can be built on almost any size piece of property. So I encourage you to learn more about vernal pools, to contact me for more information. If you're interested in learning how to build these wetlands, please read the books that I've written, go to my website and contact me, and let's see how we can work together to help the environment. Thank you.
Well, that was great. I admit that was something that really good job. Thank you so much for doing that. I had a question the whole time. I was like, okay, so can I build one? And then you said it right there at the end. So that was awesome. Thank you. Because I know a lot of our woodland owners out there are probably going, well, can I build one on my property? So thank you for that presentation.
Yes, I've worked with woodland landowners throughout Kentucky to build vernal pools. And these can be deer hunters or wildlife watchers or both. And it's remarkable how many you can build, even in the mountains of eastern Kentucky. There's always ground level enough to build a vernal pool.
I was going to say, Tom, I get the pleasure of being on a lot of properties here in Kentucky, and I've seen many of these, vernal pools being built, or, the results of them. And, and I'll attribute a lot of that to you and your work. You've really been a champion for this for a long time. And, you've educated a lot of folks on it and their values. So we really appreciate you taking the time out of your schedule to come and share it with our audience. And hopefully we can inspire others to, be better wildlife champions and get some good habitat out there as well. So again, big thanks to you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
All right.
Folks, if you got any questions for Tom, get them in quick. And if not, he gave you some great resources to follow up on.
So I think, most people are like, yes, this is awesome.
Yeah, that's some good stuff.
I'm going to check out your website and then I'll have questions, I'm sure.
Yep.
So.
All right. Thank you again, Tom. Appreciate you.
Thank you.
All right.
All right. So what's bugging my tree?
Yeah, we'll keep the party going here. And we've got Dr. Ellen Crocker with us.
Hey, everyone. How's it going?
Good. So you got another edition of What's Bugging My Tree. So I saved the big reveal for you. So
I sure do.
Share.
Well, there's always something new bugging our trees. But this week we're going to be talking about something, not really because I've been getting questions about it in trees as much as I've been getting questions about this popping up in people's yards. So can you see this?
Yes.
Great. So I have gotten so many questions about armillaria root rot. And I think that's because just overnight it will appear in someone's yard, this huge cluster of mushrooms, and caused by fungi in the genus Armillaria, thus Armillaria root rot. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about Armillaria root rot. So these huge clusters of mushrooms that fruit at the base of your trees. There are different mushrooms that can do this, but it might be honey mushrooms, which are the cause of Armillaria root rot. And so in this edition of What's Bugging My Tree, we're going to talk a little bit about it, what it does, and some potential lookalikes as well, because it's not the only thing that can fruit out of the base of your tree. So what is Armillaria root rot? It refers to a disease caused by several different fungi in the genus Armillaria, close relatives to each other, as well as some other genera. So while you might notice this when the fungus is producing mushrooms, which are the fruiting body of a fungus, that's for Armillaria is going to happen late summer, early fall. The rest of the year, the fungus that is causing this lives and grows and feeds off of wood. So this could be dead wood, logs and dead stumps in your woods, but it can also cause disease in trees, especially those that are already stressed. And here you can see a picture of the base of a tree that's not doing so well, pretty dead, and it's got a lot of wood decay there. You can see the mushrooms kind of fruiting out of it. What you can't really see is that in that wood, you've got this bigger fungal body that's eating and breaking down that wood and feeding off of it. So that is a key distinction. Armillaria root rot is referring to the disease that's caused by these fungi in the Armillaria group, but they go by different names. You might hear the mushrooms called honey mushrooms, or you might hear this damage called shoestring root rot. And I'll talk a little bit more about that and why that is. So this disease impacts the roots and bases of trees. The fungus will break down the wood, either living or dead. And of course, when it's a living tree, we call it a disease. If it's just breaking down some dead wood, that's fine. That's just being nature's recyclers. But when it's feeding on those living trees, it can, of course, kill the roots of trees, reducing their ability to uptake water and nutrients. But it can also feed on the wood. And that can result in structural issues for the tree, since it's more likely to fail if it's got a lot of decay at the base of the tree. And you can see some pictures of that right here. With the white fluffy stuff that you're seeing, that's going to be the fungus that's growing in there, that's breaking down that wood. And that's going to potentially cause more structural issues for that tree. Now, this kind of Armillaria root rot can happen on a really broad range of trees. Many different species can be impacted. And there are actually many different species of fungi that cause this kind of damage, and they can prefer different tree species. They might be common in different parts of the country or world. So even though people tend to lump these all together, Armillaria root rot, really we're talking about a lot of different things going on. So what to look for? The fungi that cause Armillaria root rot typically are hidden under the soil, beneath the bark of trees, in the roots of trees. But every year in the late summer, early fall, you can see these fungi produce mushrooms. And this is a picture of one of those clusters, a lot of those mushrooms tightly packed together. I've received a lot of photos already this fall that kind of look like this, someone's yard with lots of little clusters of mushrooms. And I love this picture that has the stump of the dead tree, and then it has these little clusters throughout the yard. And I think this is great because it shows us what's happening here. It's not that these mushrooms are really growing in the lawn, they are, but what they are really growing on are the roots of this dead tree. So there are buried roots in here, and these mushrooms are fruiting out of those because the fungus that produces them is living in that wood. It's breaking down that wood. So when you see these mushrooms popping up in your yard, what it tells you is that there's some wood somewhere hidden in there that fungus is living on. And in this case, with this big stump left there, lots of roots left there, they're likely to live for many years fruiting out of that dead wood. And they produce these huge clumps of mushrooms that can seem like they appear overnight. So really surprising for folks. Since there are actually several different species that are lumped together as causing armillaria root rot, these mushrooms can look different. For example, these honey mushrooms, Armillaria mellii, have a ring around their stem. And this is one of the common species that you might see in Kentucky. And by ring, what do I mean? Well, I mean that if you look at the stem of these mushrooms, you've got this little ring right here around that stem. Versus another very common species that's been popping up, referred to as the ringless honey mushrooms, are prolific this year, especially on the roots of pin oaks and silver maples. But you see, they don't have that little ring, and thus the name, the ringless honey mushrooms. These are just two of the more common species in our area, but depending on where you are and where you're located, there might be totally different species. These tend to emerge in large clusters on the base of trees or roots or in buried wood. But these mushrooms aren't the only signs of the fungus that's infecting these trees. Other things you might see, if you're peeling back the bark or along the roots of the trees, you might see these white mats of fungal mycelium. These are called mycelial fans here under that bark of the diseased tree. That's pretty distinctive of armillaria, although you can find kind of white mycelial growth. Lots of fungi produce that, but these mycelial fans are one of the things to look for. Another thing that you might notice, and this is how they get the name shoestring root rot, is that armillaria produce these hardened thread-like mycelial structures, and the mycelium is the vegetative structure of the fungus. If the mushroom is the fruiting body, the mycelium is what it's doing the rest of the time. And that white fluffy stuff in the mycelia fannings is mycelium, but armillaria produce these other weird structures. There's hardened black or brown shoestring-like structures. And that's going to be really different from other things and is something to look for with armillaria root rot. And here's just me holding some. You can see what that looks like in my hand, almost string-like or thread-like. So another thing to look for would be symptoms in the canopy of the tree. Things like thinning and dieback in the branches. Many times, you're not going to see underground and what's going on there unless you happen to catch the mushrooms, but you might see the thinning in the canopy and the issues there that can tell you, oh, you have a fungal problem with the roots or some root issue. It's not going to tell you what that issue is, but it could tell you that there's something going on below ground. And then, of course, sometimes this might result in tree failure or even death in those landscape trees. And while this picture is a really, severe example of that, a lot of times in our area in Kentucky, armillaria root rot is more of a gradual issue that stresses trees or impacts stress trees. Now, it's worth noting that armillaria root rot expresses differently in different places and on different species, in part because there are different species of armillaria. Some are more aggressive than others, and in part because our forests are different. They're more diverse than they are in other parts of the country. So in this picture, you can see ponderosa pine in the western US, where armillaria has kind of taken out a whole patch of otherwise healthy trees, and it's going to move out from there. So really a more serious issue that can drive decline. And if you've ever seen this U-Haul truck that describes the humongous fungus, the biggest living organism in the world, that's also an armillaria, which is kind of exciting. This is one individual colony in a forest in Michigan that's considered, the biggest living organism. Scientists have since dated it to maybe around 2,500 years old, and it's sized to be maybe 400 tons. But a note, if you go visit this fungus, don't expect to see giant mushrooms. While the below ground vegetative part of the fungus is huge, the mushrooms, they're just normal sized. So you're not going to be as impressed. But another fun fact about this particular species, Armillaria gallica, is that the mycelium sometimes will bioluminesce or glow in the dark, which is very cool. And some fungi do that. But here in Kentucky, Armillaria is typically only an issue for trees that are already stressed, or maybe those that it's an added stressor that contributes to tree decline over time. Again, maybe this has to do with our different species of Armillaria, our different climate, the high overall diversity of our stands, which prevents spread as easily from one tree to the next. But in the woodland setting, is typically not going to be something that's going to cause widespread tree death. In the landscape setting, you might see more of that. There are a lot of different stressors that impact those trees. Now, what are some other similar diseases that are out there that impact tree roots, base of trees? This is oak bracket fungus. It is something that causes damage to the base of the tree and roots, very common on stressed urban trees. Ganoderma fungi, there are lots of them. And again, they'll cause rot of the roots of the base of the tree, can not only impact the tree's health and vigor, but cause structural issues. And those are some things that functionally can cause disease in the same place as armillaria root rot. But there are also some mushrooms that are popping up this time of year that might look kind of similar that I want to point out. One of those is the jack-o'-lantern fungus. And you can see why it's called jack-o'-lantern. It's this bright orange color, but it also tends to form these large clusters on the stumps or on buried roots of hardwoods, especially oaks. And while it is beautiful and it's popping up right now, good thing to know because it is poisonous and can make you very sick if you happen to eat it. So don't mix this one up. Another one that kind of pops up and can look kind of similar are Gallorina species. Again, these are going to be popping up, feeding on dead logs, feeding on that wood. Neither it nor the jack-o'-lanterns really cause disease in the same way that armillaria does. But another one that's good to know because it's abundant, common, and it's another one that's poisonous. This is a deadly poisonous mushroom. You want to make sure that you are not confusing it for anything else. But another thing that pops up this time of year on wood. So from a management perspective, there's no cure for armillaria root rot, and it's all over our environment. You will see it on dead logs everywhere in the woods. You can't take a walk and not see signs of armillaria. However, it's important to note that this is really only a major issue for stressed and damaged trees. So promoting the health of trees will minimize potential issues. You really want to prevent any wounding, especially to the roots and base of a tree. Not only could armillaria get in there, but so could lots of other fungi. And because armillaria is typically a problem for stressed trees, minimize tree stress and you're unlikely to have major issues with armillaria in our area. There's no treatment for infected trees, but promoting the health of trees can improve their ability to fight back for armillaria and a slew of other things. But if you're maybe planted an urban tree and it has this and it's declining and dying, you might not want to plant the exact same species in the same spot. You might want to select some species that are slightly more resistant to armillaria. Otherwise, that's going to stay present in the soil and in those roots, and it might infect whatever you plant there next. So consider that if you're talking about a landscape tree. So with that, I'm going to wrap up what's bugging my tree and talking a little bit about armillaria root rot. While we're talking about the disease that's caused by armillaria today, it's fall, it's official, and there are fungi popping up everywhere. So I wish you all some happy mushroom hunting. Hopefully you're not seeing this one, but lots of other great things.
Thank you, Ellen. Greatly appreciate that. Liked your presentation, and a lot of those, I know those mushrooms are kind of like, I don't know, Halloween themed, with the jack-o'-lantern and that kind of thing. And evidently they should be, since they're not something you should eat. But
so people do eat honey mushrooms.
Right, the jack-o'-lantern one.
Sometimes. Now I will say, anytime you are looking to wild forage mushrooms, that's kind of something that you want to be really 100% certain about, because as I showed, there are several that are pretty similar looking popping up right now that you could confuse it with and be very sad about it. So yeah. And I see a question in the chat. What can you spray to kill this and not kill the tree? Unfortunately, that's really hard to do with fungi that decay the roots and wood of trees. Many of those fungi, what they're doing is they are breaking down the wood and then feeding on the dead wood. So you can't really get fungicides to them. So there's nothing you can really spray on your tree that's going to kill that fungus, because the way that that fungicide moves around is in the vascular system, and the fungus is already kind of impacting that. So it's not like an insecticide that you can spray it on a tree and you kill that fungus or other fungi that might live in the vascular system. For these decay fungi, it's all about preventing them from being there to begin with. So preventing wounding, promoting the health of trees, extending their lives as long as you can. That's really the name of the game. Now, if you've got these popping up in your yard and you just don't want to look at them, find the wood that they're growing on and remove it, or you can just rake them out when they fruit, because they'll fruit maybe once a year and then they'll be done.
Thank you so much for your presentation, Dr. Ellen. We appreciate it.
Well, thanks for having me on.
All right, so to wrap up a little bit, we had Tom Beebe-Hauser on, and then Dr. Ellen Crocker. We had vernal ponds and pools, and also talking a new edition of what's bugging our trees. So if you have any questions about today's show, go ahead and shoot me an email at forestry.extension@uky.edu, and we will get those answered for you. Also, if you have any questions or again, a show topic like we did today, you can go to fromthewoodstoday.com, and we have a little survey there, and you can fill that out, and we will get those and just see. You never know when your topic may actually be on the show. So we appreciate you joining us today, and we will see you next week at 11 o'clock. Take care. Bye.
From the woods today.